Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, okay. So, Mauro Scalia from Euratex. We represent the textile value chain, the European one. I'm going to give you an update on the Textile Delegated Act. Start a little bit with some contextual information. I'll keep it short still. So some of you may already know some of these elements. There are now about 16 pieces of legislation transforming the textile value chain, mostly driven from environmental and social matters at the global level. Now, the eco-design and DPP is circled and is probably the most important of all the 16. It's the groundbreaking legislation. As Euratex, we welcome that as long as it is properly done. This is a contest, but a lot of information required by this piece of legislation, not only the eco-design, will have an impact on DPP, we believe. And I'll touch upon that later in my overview. So on the subject matter, the ESPR, so the eco-design, and the Delegated Act, we heard William this morning saying that they expect this legislation to be adopted by June. We also heard that. We also heard from other sources that could be a slight postponement, but long story short, this will be probably updated in the second part of this year, perhaps before summertime. That's relevant because by the time the ESPR, the eco-design, is adopted, the clock starts ticking and a number of steps will be defined. So the Delegated Act on textiles specifically is expected to be adopted by the end of 2025. Some may say it's too unrealistic, but that's the timeline we look at this point in time. Once it is updated, there will be 18 months for the whole business, the value chain, to comply with. That implies that if it is adopted, the legislation by June and the Delegated Act by the end of 2025, by the mid of 27, everyone selling, for instance, garments in the EU territory will have to provide a DPP. I think that's the important information for this meeting. But the business will impact it before. So we do expect that the 2024, this year, is the year of discussing the contents of DPP. So is partially the 2025. And then the testing starts in 2025, 2026. And then it's 1 year de facto to implement it. It's a very short period of time. Because we talk about, in the EU, 192,000 companies. Some of you, we heard in the coffee break, sell IT solution providers, IT solutions. We talk about hundreds of thousands of companies. So just keep it in mind for the magnitude of importance of this legislation. A little bit of background, relevant to understand what is the content of the Delegated Act and why it's relevant for this project. In the past, eco-design was only used for energy. Some of you remember the eco score of energy products in dishwashers. Now, on the ESPR, we're going to have performance and information requirements. And every goods placed in the EU market within a certain category will have to comply with that. It's important because any company selling in the EU will have to provide a DPP which will have information also to show compliance with certain performance requirements. For example, if my shirt has 20% of recycled content, my DPP needs to provide that information. That's what we do expect. But that's for any company, no matter where it's placed in the world, to provide this information. I think it's important because it gives an idea of the complexity of also adopting the DPP. If we look specifically at the Delegated Act, it's important to keep in mind who does what. So the European Commission, such as William and Michele and other stakeholders, as we heard, and the Joint Research Center has been making research since the last year on which could be the ideal performance requirements and the information. This is continuing, and I'm going to give some updates in a moment. The stakeholders, like Euratex or like any one of you here in the room, is typically engaged via consultation. If you like, the SIRPAS 2 forum or even the stakeholders groups are some of these potential stakeholders which can communicate via this consultation, but everybody individually can do that. And then also the member state, so all these countries that we have here in front of us, will participate actively to decide what information will be placed, will be mandatory, and which performance requirements will be mandatory. We need to keep this into account because as the DPP is developed and is tested within SIRPAS, these are the information that will be developed by these players. What we expect in this year, we expect a lot of work, technical inputs, be requested by particularly joint research centers consultation. So these are the scientists of the European Commission which are carrying out, let's say, the legwork on behalf of DG GROW and DG Environment. What we notice is that some of the questions are more and more specific and new work streams are started. Now the JRC is also asking about how this will work in practice, implementation, how this will be checked by the Customs or the Market Surveillance Authority, so conformity assessment. What is the role of green public procurement, eco-label, and other aspects? So this is a year where a lot of questions will be asked and will be used by the policymakers. And then at some point this year, probably in the second half, also the European member state will appoint representative in the so-called Eco-Design Forum, again, to make decision about what information is going to be mandatory and what performance requirements will be mandatory. A little bit more on the details. So this JRC, that as I tried to explain, is one of the main technical body now involved, has already made initial questions last year, has published a study in on February 23rd, followed by a workshop and an input consultation which closed in April. Euratex participated, many other stakeholders. What is going to happen next? There will be 2 more consultations still this year. One we expect after the summertime. And the third one, I circled that, will specifically ask for input on DPP. I think that's probably an interesting milestone also for the SIRPAS 2 workload. We do not yet know exactly when this will take place, but we expect by the end of this year. I don't enter into details, mindful of time, but of course we can discuss that today, tomorrow, and so on. Giving a flavor of what do we talk about when we talk about the Textile Delegated Act. We talk about performance requirements and information requirements. The last one basically means DPP. The purpose of this slide is not to show you what Euratex is asking for, that's out of the contest, but it's to give you a flavor of what type of informations are being potentially looked at. We do expect that the digital product passport will be used to show compliance with information, with performance requirements, and there will be a mutual link between these 2 points. For example, if I want to demonstrate that this shirt has 20% recycled content, this has to be possible. This information has to be possible to flow in the value chain. If we cannot, for instance, demonstrate that there is recycled content, that the information cannot be traveled and cannot be in the DPP, then this would challenge the capacity of putting these performance requirements. So it's important to reflect on DPP contents from these 2 points of view, the performance and the information on the same items. At the same time, we believe as Euratex that DPP is also an opportunity for traceability at large scale beyond the ESPR, and I come back to that in a moment, which is basically this slide here. As I mentioned, ESPR, eco-design, is one of the most important legislation. There are others, such as the Green Claim Directive, the due diligence legislation. Sorry, there is a typo, it's CSR DDD, not CSR RD, as obviously you all notice, familiar with acronyms. And national legislation. We heard this morning one of our partners works with traceability introduced because of the French national laws. So the point I want to make here is that we do not need to look only at the eco-design requirements, which will be mandatory, but there are some other legislation which will create a need for data exchange in the value chain. Data which goes all the way back to where the cotton comes from, to the yarn, to the fabric, to the finishing on the fabric, to the finished product making, to the sell, to the recycling. It's at least 6 steps. And for instance, there is this law called the Green Claim Directive, which will oblige a company making a sustainability claim to demonstrate why, to substantiate this claim. I cannot say my product is green, I need to demonstrate that. That is linked to something called PEF, product environmental footprint, which is going to be defined by 2025 and is becoming law by 2028, as you see in the slide, which will require, again, a lot of information traveling the value chain. And we believe the traceability created by the DPP might be an opportunity to ensure this information travel. I think this is very much aligned to what Caroline said this morning. DPP is not only for compliance with regulation, but it's also there for circular business models. This is basically the same, but it's even in legislation, although in other legislation. That's all in 10 minutes sharp. I didn't want to extend too much. We will be glad also to host you later today, but that's perhaps something that Carol will elaborate. So if there is any question, happy to answer now or later today or even tomorrow. Thank you.